Welcome back to 28storms.com. This is your tropical weather update for Friday, June 10th, 2011. We don't really have a whole lot to discuss in the Atlantic, but we're still going to take a quick look at things, especially the tropical disturbance out in the southwest Bahamas. And of course, we'll take a look at Major Hurricane Adrian in the eastern Pacific. As of the 2 p.m. tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center, they're still monitoring 94L Invest, which has now moved into the southwest Bahamas. This was the same system that we were monitoring in the Caribbean, especially the western Caribbean, over the last week. The storm has kind of perked up again within the last 24 hours, and they now give this storm or disturbance about a 10% chance of forming into a tropical cyclone within the next 2 days. This is the latest enhanced infrared, and as you can see, much of the basin is relatively quiet. We just still have this mess of convection out here in the southwest Atlantic, just east of Florida, into the Bahamas. And this is somewhat of an area to watch, although I must say that if it wasn't for the upper level wind shear that's currently passing through this area, this would be a greater area to keep an eye on. But the problem is that the upper level winds remain strongly unfavorable. We still have this very persistent upper level low located just off the Florida coast in the Gulf of Mexico, and right ahead of that we have a strong jet streak of vertical wind shear aloft, and that's just going to completely shear apart any low pressure center that tries to get cooking underneath this disorganized convection to the north of Cuba. All that being said, though, there are indications that a very weak surface low is trying to form between Grand Bahama Island and Andros Island. As you can see, there is some weak low level turning now becoming a little bit more visible here. You can see this weak circulation just south of Freeport a little bit better on the latest NASA imagery, and you do see some weak low-level turning, but as noted, we have a lot of strong southwest wind shear, thus the reason why any convection is off toward the northeast, while the surface trough extends all the way down to Cuba. This is the latest infrared floater, and as noted in the visible, any surface low pressure would be forming right around this area, and as we can see, this is a fairly pathetic looking satellite representation with all of the convection being blown off to the northeast with really nothing at all left down here except for some upper level divergence spurring up some more convection just ahead of that upper level low in the southeast Gulf of Mexico. Over the next 1 to 3 days, the pattern over much of the western Atlantic and continental United States will become a bit more progressive, and what will end up happening is the upper level low that's over the Gulf of Mexico will begin to kick out toward the east and out to sea as we get some more troughiness and more progressive flow from west to east. And not only will this upper level trough kick out, but it's also going to help to move anything that begins or tries to form in the Bahamas out to sea, and it's going to be absorbed by a non-tropical area of troughiness in the very near future. So we're not expecting much at all from that system. It's not going to develop. If anything, it's going to continue to cause some rainfall for portions of the Bahamas, possibly over the next 48 additional hours, but after that it's going to kick out to sea while becoming more non-tropical. The rest of the tropical Atlantic is very quiet, and it looks like it's going to remain that way for the next 6 to 7 days. All of the models show pretty much no tropical activity during this period, and just for good measure, this is the latest 12Z GFS run. We're looking at sea level pressure, and there really isn't much to talk about. And in terms of our southwest Atlantic low, none of the models really developed that storm either. And then as you can see on this model, it gets shunted off out to the northeast before becoming absorbed within the next 48 to 72 hours by a much larger non-tropical feature to the north. Switching gears to the eastern Pacific now, we still have Major Hurricane Adrian. As of the latest advisory, it's still a 135 mile per hour Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, and it looks like it's going to persist for the next several days, although it looks like it's already peaked in intensity, and if anything, it's going to begin to slowly weaken. Here's the latest floater imagery, and as you can see, Hurricane Adrian is still a well-defined, very strong hurricane. It has very decent outflow channels, especially the equatorward outflow channel, although the poleward outflow channel really doesn't extend that far to the north, and I'll get into why that may be occurring. But other than that, this still has a very nice, well-defined central dense overcast, and if anything, the eye can be a little bit better defined, but it's still a very impressive hurricane nonetheless. The latest enhanced infrared shows still a very well-defined storm, but it looks like over the last 6 hours the cloud tops have warmed a bit, which is a sign that we're not seeing as much explosive convective development anymore. So it looks like this storm may have also maxed out, and in addition to that, it looks like the eye has become just a bit more cloud-filled compared to what this storm began like in the first few frames of this animation. The latest water vapor floater also shows that that poleward outflow channel may be a bit restricted to the north, but that's the extent of problems with the outflow at the moment. Wind shear in the vicinity of Adrian remains very light, thus the reason why we are in fact dealing with a major hurricane. But with all that being said though, one inhibiting parameter at the moment is that the fact that the storm is located on the southern end of this mid-level ridge, so we do have not as much upper level divergence aloft as we would like to have to see any continued intensification or growth of this hurricane. But again, this is still a fairly favorable pattern, and it's really no surprise that we have a Category 4 hurricane on our hands. Here's the latest microwave animation of Hurricane Adrian, and as this loop starts over, you see that it began as a very well-defined inner core, but toward the very end of this animation, we really start to see a drop-off in the intensity of this thing at the very end, and that could be the result of some dry air intrusion beginning to finally wrap into the inner core of this hurricane. Here's the latest precipitable water analysis of the Eastern Pacific, and this is the beginning of our tropical cyclone in the first few days. And as it begins to move more toward the northwest, you see in the last few frames we see a bigger presence of dry air beginning to move south along the Baja Peninsula, and that could be the reason that the storm is beginning to weaken. It's beginning to wrap around the inner circulation of the storm, as we saw in the latest microwave animation. The latest model intensity forecasts also seem to support the fact that, or more than likely a fact that, Hurricane Adrian has already maxed out in intensity. There's only one model that shows any slight intensification over the next 12 hours, but after that, pretty much every single model shows a very rapid decline in the storm's intensity. The model consensus also continues to support the official forecast of Adrian remaining well out to sea and away from Mexico. There are a few more models today that begin to turn the storm more toward the north, toward the Baja Peninsula, but even if that were the case, by the time the storm gets there, it will be in a much weakened state, more than likely below tropical depression status, with little in the way of even any type of precipitation. This is today's mid-level steering analysis, and as we can see, we still have that weak mid-level ridging still hanging on along western Mexico, and that's preventing the storm from moving north. But we do have a little bit of a deepening of the mid-level trough over California, and thus the storm is now beginning to move closer to the western periphery of this mid-level ridge. So a more poleward motion may eventually begin to occur over the next 2 to 3 days, but again, it's going to be in a much weakened state. As you can see, the southwest vertical wind shear is much stronger to the north. Sea surface temperatures in this area are well below the 26 degrees Celsius threshold for this storm to be able to maintain itself. And we've already talked about the rapid intrusion of dry air making its way down the west coast of the United States and the Baja Peninsula. So, Hurricane Adrian will go down as being a storm that is fun to watch on satellite imagery, but all this time it will have posed no threat to any land masses, which is certainly a good thing. So we're looking good in the tropics today. Be sure to check back in for another tropical weather video from 28storms.com by tomorrow afternoon.